Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that. I didn't realize I couldn't screen share when we started. I only have that choice from the beginning screen. So anyway, welcome. I am Dr. Michelle Fanensteel from the Salt Cured Pig. I am the CEO of Durago Food Safety, and today we are doing office hours. So what does that mean? That means that I'm going to be sharing some information and you guys are going to be asking me questions because I already know all this stuff. So for those of you who don't know, I'm the food safety admin here at the Salt Cured Pig, and I run a food safety company called Durago Food Safety up in scenic Maine. You should come see us. We love it. And let's just dive on in, grab your coffee, and let's get started. So as we talk about this, we're going to, here's the contents of what we're going to talk about it. And the first thing I want to discuss with you is, what do we mean by dry cured meats? Okay, these are only 2 sections of the 11 different kinds of HACCP planning you can have under the USDA. And I subgroup them into not heat treated shelf stable, which you'll see in the rest of the presentation as NHTSS whole and NHTSS ground. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what the common critical control points are. I'm assuming everybody's coming into this with some basic knowledge of HACCP. If you don't have a basic knowledge of HACCP, that's fine. I will be flipping back and forth between my screens so that I can get your questions. I would truly urge you to go over to my website and I'll post this in the links, but we have a handout, or not a handout, I guess a web screen of the 12 steps of HACCP. So I like to say HACCP is a 12-step program. I have other videos and stuff over on my business Facebook page where you can hear about HACCP. I'm going to be sharing later this week on the different kinds of HACCPs when we're talking about HACCP. And I want to make really, really clear in this is dry cured meats for USDA production. If you are doing a charcuterie program for your bar or your restaurant, chances are you are doing it under your state food code. Okay, state food code HACCP is different than USDA HACCP. Okay, I'm covering that on my regular business office hours at the end of the week, so you can tune in for that. But I want to reiterate, this is USDA production, not food code production, because food code production can be actually state by state or locality by locality. So with that in mind, we're going to go through the common critical control points around dry cured sausage production. Then we're going to be talking about pathogen control, because I mean, the original reason anybody dry cured meats was actually to make them more safe to eat. Okay, we're going to talk about record keeping, and then there are some other issues and questions that have come up while we've been doing this. So let me pop over and see if anybody has any questions so far. And nope. And if you don't realize, on the right hand side of or I guess when you're doing, like when you're watching the Facebook Live, you can add comments and things like that. So feel free to leave a comment and I will be able to all right, and I will be able to address questions. And Steve's asking a question about hanging cured whole muscle chunks for cold smoking and the 1200 degree hour apply. That's an awesome question, Steve. Thanks for asking it. I will apply that. I will get to that question when we're talking about pathogen control, but the short version is no, degree hours only applies to ground product. Okay, but I'll come back to that. All righty. So let's just dive right on in. So let's go do what I call HACCP, the short version. All right, when somebody comes to me and says, hey, can you write my HACCP plan? I ask them 3 basic questions. What are you making? How are you making it? And where do you get your ingredients from? Okay, and we spend a lot of time answering those questions in excruciating detail. So, and that's what starts us on the HACCP planning process. as I had mentioned before, there are 12 steps to HACCP, which start with form your food safety team and end with make sure that you've implemented the plan correctly. All right. I'm going to cover HACCP in each individual step in later office hours and webinars on my blog or on my Facebook Live from my business. But the short version is HACCP is a way of thinking and drawing out what you are doing and how you are doing it. Okay, so the first question then is, what do we make? Well, this is a copy of the table that I make my clients fill out when we start a HACCP plan. Or if you take the online meat and poultry HACCP class from me, you will get this graph as part of your homework and you'll have to turn it back in. Okay, so I'm going to cover two common products that we talk a lot about. Okay, we talk about saucisson, saucisse sèche, which are French dry cured sausages. This is very comparable to Italian salumis, and their variations really are on like the pork, the kind of pork, the source of pork, and the flavorants that go into it. Okay, so we're going to cover saucisson as a not heat treated, shelf stable ground product, and we're going to cover prosciutto as a not heat treated, shelf stable whole muscle product. Okay, so the first thing that I want to draw your attention to is the ingredients. It is incredibly important that you understand your ingredients and where your ingredients come from, because of course in USDA production you must have like an approved supplier program where you can track letters of guarantee and that the product that you're bringing in is free of pathogens or as free of pathogens as possible. The more you can track that stuff, the fewer pathogens you actually have to control for. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about salmonella or trichinella and probably salmonella. Okay, so in the saucisson, we're taking lean pork trim. We're adding back fat to it, which is very common when you're making sort of a longer hung dried sausage. You need that more solid back fat. If you are raising pigs and you need to know how to get your back fat to the solidity that you want, it's dependent upon long chain fatty acids versus short chain fatty acids, or how much dairy do you feed your pork? Okay, feel free to ask questions on that. That's all I'm going into on that. Then, of course, we have salt. Salts differ. Be aware of how your salt interacts with your meat. We're adding black pepper. I need people to be aware that black pepper is a known source of salmonella. Okay, and so when you add black pepper to a product, you may in fact be adding salmonella to your product, and you just need to be aware of that. Cure number 2, Prague powder number 2. Please refer to other videos. I believe it was nitrates, nitrites, CBOT, everything you wanted to know, but were afraid to ask, that I did, probably a while back. But Cure 2 is a nitrate, nitrite, and salt combination. And you have to understand percentages in those. Now, they don't vary greatly here in America, but you have to understand what your percentage of nitrate is, what your percentage of nitrite is, and how much salt, so that you understand and you get the product that you want. Bactofirm. Bactofirm is, of course, a additive of bacteria that we use to accelerate fermentation. We use Bactofirm because the USDA really, really frowns on backslopping. Do not take portions of your previous lot of sausage and put it into your current lot of sausage in order to accelerate and create the fermentation that you want. I know you have very special lacto-fermenting bacteria in wherever that you're doing it, but if you're doing it under USDA production, it is almost impossible to get that done and do the record keeping necessary. Is it okay from a safety point of view? Most likely. But the difference is the amount of record keeping that you're going to need in order to get through to the USDA inspectors that what you're doing is safe. Okay, and then red wine. A lot of times these recipes call for red wine into the fermentation process. We also wash the outside. A lot of people wash the outside and wash the mold off the outside because consumers don't like mold. Wash the outside for to get the molds and things off. You may also add mold 600 to this. If you're adding molds once it goes into the fermentation chamber, you would put mold 600 in here. Okay, and so then you can see on the prosciutto that we are looking at leg subprimals. Oops, listed salt twice. We're going to have salt, cure 2 again, and then that lard and rice flour combination. If you are using a wheat flour for that, I forgot the name of the stuff that you smear on the prosciutto, you must include that in allergen control programming, and I'm going to talk about that at the end of the production. So let me pause here and look for questions. All right, no questions so far, but besides Steve, glad I could help Steve. We'll talk, stay tuned, we'll keep talking about it. Okay, so then let's talk about the risks. Now, what I want to draw attention to you is there are different risks for the saucisson from the prosciutto, okay? And this also gets to your question, Steve, around why do I care about degree hours? So if we look at this at the pathogens that saucisson and prosciutto have in common, Trichinella, Salmonella, and Listeria. These are the first two. Trichinella, we always have to worry about in ready-to-eat pork products. We must control for Trichinella in ready-to-eat pork products. I did office hours on that last week. Please tune into that. Go look at the video. There are some really good uploads that we put in there around trichinellosis and controlling for trichinellosis. Salmonella is known to occur in pigs, and if you're serving actually any ready-to-eat food in America, from pigs or from cows or from peanuts, you must control for salmonella. Salmonella is the leading cause of foodborne illness in America. The USDA and the FDA take it very, very seriously. You must control for Listeria in any ready-to-eat food. I covered that, I think, 2 weeks ago. We are in the middle of the largest Listeria outbreak we have ever known in the history of the world, and it's in South Africa, and it's from prepared meats from Tiger Foods. 200 people have died, 1,000 people are sick. And if I have any folks tuning in from South Africa, Bill Marler is now in your backyard. Congratulations. At least you got him away from us. So then what I want to draw your attention to on the saucisson is that there are 2 other pathogens we have to worry about. We have to worry about Staph aureus, and we have to worry about CBOT, Clostridium botulinum. Staph aureus is, of course, is a bacteria that comes in with the pigs. It is also a bacteria that is present on people, or in the what we call the triangle around your nose, from your eyes to your mouth to your nose. And Staph aureus grows in the danger zone. This is the pathogen that if you've gone and you've eaten at the buffet and 6 hours later you are thinking you're going to die, you're throwing up so badly, generally that's Staph aureus toxicity. It creates a heat stabile, so a heat stable, I don't know why we say stabile, but we do, a heat stable toxin, okay, which means you can't cook it to get rid of it. Once it's there, it's there. So we have to make sure that it does not get created. Your sausage is created by people. When you ferment it, you put it in the danger zone, and therefore we must control for Staph aureus. We control for Staph aureus through degree hours. All right, I will go through that calculation in a couple of slides. Clostridium botulinum. Clostridium botulinum occurs in the air. It's comes in on our shoes. It's from the soil, and we are grinding. When you take your product and you put it through the grinder, you put it through the buffalo chopper, or you otherwise create a batter out of it. You are taking C. botulism from the air and putting it into your food, and so we have to control for that. You'll notice that we're not controlling for Staph aureus and CBOT in the prosciutto product. Well, that's because we are not making a batter and subjecting things to reduced oxygen conditions. So we don't have to control for that, because we are not manipulating the meat in a way that increases its surface area and risk for Staph aureus, and we're not creating a and we're not creating a reduced oxygen environment for the prosciutto when we're making it, because we're not casing it. So it's the casing in the saucisson that actually makes the reduced oxygen environment. Okay. If you are curing your meats and you're doing equilibrium cure under vacuum packing, we control for CBOT through refrigeration. So if you want to equilibrium cure a prosciutto or a noix de jambon or smaller cut from a ham or a shoulder, you can do that. You must do it under refrigeration because there is no other control for CBOT there, and you are creating a reduced oxygen environment. And the only way to control for that in that case is through temperature control. So let me pause here and see if there are any questions. Okay, all right. Are casings considered an ingredient? Yes, casings are considered an ingredient. Sorry, I should have listed them. That was my oversight, Yosef. So thanks for pointing that out. But yes, casings are considered an ingredient. It's of surpassing importance that you get letters of guarantee from your casings providers so that you know that they are coming from USDA production. If you are using natural casings, they must be USDA natural casings. If you are not using natural casings, then by now they should be produced under what's called a preventive controls plan. And I will probably be doing an office hours pretty soon about the intersection between the Food Safety Modernization Act and USDA meats production. And casings is one of the places where we're going to have that. Okay, I had a question about whole muscles. Do you control for CBOT? The answer is no. In regular production, not equilibrium curing of whole muscles, we do not control for CBOT because there's nothing there that's creating an anaerobic environment. All right, so it's incredibly important that you use your refrigerator if you're doing equilibrium curing, and that you cut well so you're not making pockets in your whole muscles, which you want to do anyway because it makes a bad product if you're making pockets. Okay, so let's drive on here. All right, so we said, what am I making? And then the next question was, how am I making it? Well, here are the steps of how you make something in any sort of food production. We receive stuff, we store stuff, we process stuff, we package and label stuff, we put it in finished product storage, and then we get rid of it, okay, through sales. The whole entire point of doing USDA production is to sell stuff and make profit, right? So we are going to then dive into this, but I want to tell you, when you're doing HACCP planning, you have to list out all of these steps. We receive meat, we receive non-meat food ingredients, we receive restricted ingredients, we receive packaging and labeling, we store all of those different things, okay? I'm not going through that here. You can tune into the online meat and poultry HACCP course to learn how to do all of that. But let's dive into what we mean by process. Okay, so when you are doing a HACCP plan, you have to go through the first 5 steps of HACCP, of which we started. So step 1 is identify your food safety team and make sure they have appropriate training. Step 2 is identify your food. That's what we just did. Step 3 is identify your consumer. You must make your food safety planning based on how your consumer consumes your food. If you think you're making a not ready to eat product and your consumers are eating it as a ready-to-eat product, that's pretty hard to label yourself out of. And then finally, we have the 4th step is process flow diagramming. Okay, this is an example of a process flow diagram, production sub-process, if you will, where we're writing out the steps of what we do. Now, obviously, this is going to be more complicated. Under weigh ingredients, we weigh restricted ingredients, we weigh non-restricted ingredients, and we weigh the meat itself. And it's the combination of those calculations that actually gets us to the parts per million of ingoing salts that is the critical control point. Okay, but I want to tell you that under a USDA process, common critical control points in a dry cured meats HACCP plan: rinsing the whole muscles with an acid to create a log reduction in salmonella control. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Weighing ingredients so that we don't create a chemical hazard from our restricted ingredients. They're restricted for a reason. Creating batter can be a critical control point because you can't let your batter heat up but it sort of depends on the size of your production process. It doesn't necessarily have to be a critical control point. We arrive at these critical control points through our hazard analysis. So I have skipped a step in talking about these critical control points. I urge you to go learn about hazard analysis and understand how I came to these, because this is not a HACCP class. So then once we've created the batter, encased the batter, and that sort of stuff in a sausage process, we're sending it to ferment, okay? And that's where we start worrying about botulism, where we start worrying about Staph aureus toxicity, and then we send things on to dry. Now, when you're making a whole mussel, we skip the batter and the ferment process, and we basically just go to the dry process, okay? And so that is simultaneously more confusing from a critical control point and pathogen control standpoint, and less confusing because it's actually, in my estimation, an easier HACCP plan to write. So let me pop over here and look for questions. Okay, no questions so far. That's awesome. Okay, so then we have there are a variety of things that we have to control for in this process. So let's dive into why are we doing all of these steps? Well, we're doing all of these steps because we have to do pathogen control. Okay, and here are all the pathogens that I listed out in the previous step. So trichinolosis, again, I did office hours last week on trichinolosis. There are really only a couple of ways to cure for trichinella, and in dry cured meats, we have two ways of curing, of controlling for trichinella. We either freeze the meat beforehand, all right, and so if you wanted to use lower salt, lower drying times, you have to freeze the meat. There's really no other way about it. You can get the meat really cold really fast in, I mean, they're not cheap, but in laboratory freezers. Okay, so these freezers exist. The warmer your freezer, the longer the meat has to be in there, the higher inventory carrying cost you have. So you have to weigh how much it costs you to hold inventory against how much your freezer costs, and the carrying cost of the freezer and electricity. Okay, but those are your only choices. So we freeze for trichinella, or we salt and dry for trichinella. And there are papers. Somebody posted the Canadian Veterinary, the Journal of Canadian Veterinary Medicine or something, paper around salt percentages and Genoa salami and prosciutto. I urge you, when you are reading that, to understand that that is a process that used nitrates. If you don't want to use nitrates, you can't use that paper because your process won't match. All right, it is entirely possible to do all of this without nitrates. I'm not going into that this morning because it's substantially more complicated. But that's what we got on trichinella. And you have to, on trichinella control, track your weight losses, and things have to cure for specific amounts of time in order to meet the trichinella critical control points. Salmonella. Okay, salmonella comes with pork and is a known hazard in pork. And in ready-to-eat foods in America, we must have what's called a 5-log reduction of salmonella. And there is a salmonella control guidance out there that you must follow. This is one of those things that I can't begin to explain this, but varies from district to district in the USDA. There are districts that say you have controlled for salmonella if you meet a certain water activity, and there are districts that say you have not killed the salmonella, and then therefore it is not a safe product just by water activity, and you must prove 5 logs of reduction. I don't have any answer for that, but that's my experience. I work across the country, and different districts treat this differently. Okay, and so what I am telling people is that you have to have a 5-log reduction in salmonella in dry cured meats, and basically we do this as a multiple hurdle approach. We wash with an acid. You can use lactic acid or acetic acid, okay, and then we salt and we dry. And if you look at the paper that I referred to in trichinella, it also talks about salmonellosis and controlling for salmonellosis using a drying process. Okay, so that's what I got for you. It's bad science. I'm not going to lie, it's bad science, but nobody's doing research into this because there's no money in it. So If I win the lottery, I'll start doing it. But until then, we're stuck with what's out there. All right, listeriosis. Listeriosis, again, is happens in all ready to, it doesn't happen. It can occur in all ready-to-eat foods. It occurs in cold, wet atmospheres, which is a lot of what meat production is. It's cold and wet, even though when we're drying, we're trying to get warm and dry. And your biggest risk is if you slice things on a slicer. You got to take that slicer apart, clean it, pre-op sanitation, and your sanitation for Listeria has to be really, really on point. And you have to be able to prove and test and all that good sort of stuff. When you are designing facilities, I design out having drains where we process food because Listeria lives in drains. Don't have the drain, you're not going to have Listeria in your drain, okay? Training around Listeria is incredibly important. All right, so those are the ones that we have in common between dry cured ground products and the dry cured whole muscle products. That's everything you have to control for in whole muscles: Trichinella, Salmonella, Listeria. For ground products, we have two additions. We have Staph aureus and we have botulinum. Okay, there I've put in the degree hour calculation. It's hard to communicate over like a PowerPoint slide how to do this, but basically you don't worry about Staph aureus if you hold your temperatures for curing under 60, your fermentation step. Under 60, don't worry about degree hours. I personally like sausages that are cured low and slow. I think it develops the pork flavor better, frankly. But if you are going for hot and fast, knock yourself out because that's what you like and you like that tang, great. It's fine. Below there, and I want to point out that below 90 degrees, you have 1200 degree hours. Okay, so say you are fermenting at 70 degrees. 70 minus 60 equals 10. And you are fermenting for 48 hours. 10 times 48 is 480. You have 1200 degree hours. You're only getting to 480, but you need to get to a pH of 5.3. And if you're wondering how you measure pH, I have found out that there are some USDA approved, food safe, flat tip pH probes that are a hell of a lot less than some of the others we have thrown around here. I've put them on the page. I get no kickback from the instrument makers around those things. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do. You have to get to a pH of 5.3 in 1200 degree hours if you are fermenting between 60 and 90 degrees. If you are fermenting over 90 degrees, you have fewer degree hours to get there. And I recommend looking in the files and you know, if you just search in the discussion on degree hour calculations, you can see where we get that from, those degree hours from the dry, it's a, I think it's a GMA publication on dry and semi-dry sausages. But 5.3 degree hours. All right. CBOT. You have two options for C. botulinum control. You can either use nitrates or you can use temperature. There you go. If you are using, if you're doing a nitrate-free sausage product, you got to keep it cold. You got to ferment it cold. You got to smoke it cold. If you're smoking it, you got to and you got to dry it cold. And that's how we prevent CBOT until you get down to the active water or a pH or a low pH to control for the CBOT. It's a lot more complicated without the nitrates. That's all I can tell you. I mean, that's why we started adding nitrates, is because it keeps you from dying from botulinum poisoning. But I totally understand there are people out there who don't want to use them, and that's totally fine. Okay, but it's more complicated HACCP planning. All right, so we've kind of run through that, but let me go and check for questions. All right, if you do an acid wash, can you achieve 5 logs of reduction? The answer, unfortunately, is no. All the validation I have found out there gets you, at best, a 3 and change log reduction on salmonella from washing the whole muscles, and that you're going to turn into trim or turn into whole muscle cures. Is the raw batter test still needed? So you can also, Joseph brings up a good point. You can also do paired testing. If you aren't acid washing or whatever, okay, and you have you can test your batter and you can test your finished product, and they will accept that. If the test is negative and the finished product is negative, that's a little more complicated, but that is, doing paired testing is acceptable. It's very expensive. So, because those tests, unless you have an in-house lab, you know, those tests for, I mean, I estimate in time, money, and the actual expense are between $60 and $80 a test. And then you got to do 2 tests per batch. Well, where the hell is your profit margin? Okay. So an acid wash alone will not get you 5 logs of reduction in salmonella. There are some other technologies that people are looking at. UV technology, that is not really as yet proved itself to be cost effective in meat and poultry production. And then cold pressure, you know, the hyperbaric systems and things like that, they're showing that that actually doesn't work all that well on meat and poultry, which really, I had high hopes for that technology, I have to tell you, and it doesn't look like it works all that well in meat and poultry. Okay, so those are the pathogens of concern. So let's talk about record keeping. If you didn't write it down, it did not happen, my friends. And so we have to keep track of several things around your critical control points. Now, there's lots and lots of records that you are going to have in USDA production, but there is specific requirements around record keeping for CCP production, and it's called monitoring. These are called monitoring records, okay? And your monitoring records are legal documents, and you are required to have them by the Code of Federal Regulation. If you use the CCPs that I have been talking about, okay, you are going to have at least the following records, all right? You're going to dilute your acid, okay? Your acid does not come in the percentage that you need. You need usually between a 2 and 5% acid solution. Vinegar that you buy at the store comes at 5%. You got to dilute that back to 2.5%. Using more acid does not get you more kill because it's not validated. All right. Lactic acid generally comes concentrated as like a syrup or a solution or whatever. You got to dilute that out, and you got to dilute that out correctly, and you got to put dates and times around how you diluted it. Then, so that's one kind of monitoring, because that leads up to, it's kind of a cumulative CCP, I guess. So we dilute the acid correctly, okay, and then we add acid to the pieces of meat, and we spray acid or dip the meat in the acid, and you have to record dates and times around when you did that, all right? If you're using nitrates or you're using other accelerants, you have to measure out your restricted ingredients, and you have to do the math. Now, do you have to do the math on every production sheet? No, but you better be able to point your in-house inspector where the math was done and that you met the ingoing salt concentration requirements of being above, what is it, like 120 parts per million and below 625. Okay. You don't have to do it on every single one, but you got to be able to point to the math. And I highly recommend taking like one recipe a quarter and going back and doing the math and keeping yourself fresh on it and making sure that you understand it, because it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole very fast with that. All right, fermentation times and temperatures. You have to say, okay, if I'm fermenting my sausage, I put it in the curing chamber at this time, at this temperature, and then track all 100-degree hours to get to 5.3. Drying times, temps, and humidities. I get asked, and there's a current question out on the page about correlating weight loss to active water. And the truth is that there's no table out there, because it is 100% dependent on conditions within your facility. If you are doing your fermentation in a Staginello cabinet, it's going to be different than if you're doing fermentation in a room or any other sort of, curing setup that you have in your USDA production. So I highly recommend that when you're going into production, you have to do something called a 90-day validation. Well, if you can, in that 90-day validation, say, in my drying chamber, the temperature is this, the humidity is this, and the sausage size is this, because of course it's really dependent on sausage diameter. And and you can start correlating weight losses to water activity, then you can validate times weight losses and water activity, but you got to do it in-house. It's not particularly complicated to do it in-house, but it does take an awful lot of data tracking, and you have to be able to track the data for 90 days, and you have to put in appropriate other verifications that you're doing it, okay? And so if you can correlate that stuff, rock on with your bad self and create those tables, but they got to be created in-house for your own particular production process. And it also means that you have to keep really close tabs on your temperatures and your humidities, because if your humidity is off, I mean, how many conversations about case hardening do we have here on the Salt Cured Pig? So watching your humidity and making sure things aren't drying too fast is really, really important for both quality and safety. Okay, so now let me talk a little bit about that 90-day validation. That 90-day validation is what you do when you go into USDA production. It is a requirement of USDA production that you prove that you can do what you said you were going to do when it was helpful. Verify, to verify is to tell the truth, and to validate is to ask if it was helpful. And so when we do 90-day validation, do lots and lots and lots and lots of data collection at the beginning, and we subsequently, when we know we're meeting our critical control points and doing all the things that we need to do, we back it off. There is a verification and validation guidance out there from the USDA. I will put it up in the notes section that talks a lot about how to do this, and so that you can do it yourself. Okay, and it's a really, frankly, process of creating the right spreadsheets. And then I urge you to look at your data and derive information from your data. And that's your 90-day validation. Okay. All right, looking for questions, and then we're going to wrap up pretty soon. Okay. So some other issues, standards of identity. If you Google your sausage name and standard of identity and FSIS, you will find out whether or not there's a standard of identity. It is of surpassing importance to understand that there are things that have standards of identity. You cannot make a not heat-treated, shelf-stable hot dog. You must make a cooked, not shelf-stable hot dog, because hot dogs have a standard of identity. If you have a question about standard of identity, put your product in the comment section, and I will look up the standard of identity for you and show you where I got the information. Okay, these complicated European sausages, most of them don't have a standard of identity, so you probably don't have to worry about it. Okay, but there are things that very much do have a standard of identity, and you got to conform to that. If oh, that's my dog. Sorry, somebody's come to the door. So you got to conform to those standards of identity. All right, I had a question about documentation requirements. In USDA production, we have something called pre-shipment review. Your pre-shipment review is you signing off that all your critical control points were met, all your sanitation was met, and anything that's been tested has been tested and held. If you have something that's going for laboratory testing, you can't sell it under USDA production, okay? Those are the documents that you must have to get your product out the door. The documents that you need to get your product in the door, well, that's kind of dependent upon your approved supplier program, okay? So, if you have more detailed questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. All right, labeling. You must have approved labels before you do this. You need to Google LSAS, L-S-A-S, FSIS, and it will take you to the label approval system. You must log in on your own and figure out how to submit your labels. I don't think anything that we're talking about here can be done through generic label approval. I think it all has to go through label approval. So please build that time in to your business planning, because label approvals for complicated dry cured products are not easy to get. I mean, they're totally gettable. I have clients get them all the time, but it's not a 24-hour turnaround, I'll tell you that, okay? And they can come back with some really, really, really goofy questions, all right? So just build that time in, and if you know what your labels are gonna look like, by all means, start that process as soon as you can if you know you're going for USDA production. Okay, The final thing I want to talk about is allergen control. Now, in our product definitions, we did not define any allergens into our product, but there are people who use soy as a binder, they use dairy as a binder, and you can have other added ingredients like nuts or whatever. It's really, really important you understand what the big 8 allergens are and how you have to label for them. Okay, labeling for allergens is very, very specific. The law is called FACALPA. And if you have questions about that, post those questions. But the big 8 allergens are dairy and eggs, wheat and soy, tree nuts and peanuts, shellfish and scalefish. Okay, if you are using any of those 8 things, you must have an allergen control plan and you must label appropriately. If you are in USDA production and you are not using any allergens and you receive products that have more than 2 ingredients, you must have an allergen control plan. Okay. Now, your allergen control plan can be very short if you have no allergens, but it still must be written down. Okay. Let me pop over and get some questions. All right. Any questions here? Nope. All right. So those are the issues that we've come up with. I'm going to hang out here for another couple of minutes to see if anybody has any questions to pop on. But again, I'm Dr. Michelle Pfannenstiel, and I'm the CEO of Dirigo Food Safety, and I'm the food safety admin here on the Salt Cured Pig. I'm here to answer your questions. I'm here to help you make good product and to create profitable, amazing businesses. So thanks for tuning in this morning on a cold, snowy day here in Maine. We'll all talk to you soon, and I'm going to hang out over on the Facebook page for questions. All right, and so for those who have questions, I'm going to give it till 9:15 my time, so we've got another 2 minutes. You're welcome, Steve. Thanks for tuning in. It's always nice to see you on my Facebook Lives. I love hanging out with you. Maybe we'll actually get to meet in person someday. All right. Other issues, anybody? Any other issues? Okay. All right. Well, it looks like I'm not going to get any other questions. Of course, we have a comment section, so we're going to stop it here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go drink some more coffee, everybody, if you're west of me, and, I don't know, have a glass of wine because it's probably about quitting time if you're east of me. So have a great day, everybody. I love you all. Thanks for tuning in.